This panel focuses on the challenges that people face coming out of the prison system, especially people of color, around finding work. The double challenge they face because of their status as former prisoners and because of their status around their race. And we've got some people who've got some important stories to tell about local campaigns that address this issue. I just want to point out that there are many job organizing campaigns in networks across the country that address job challenges in a lot of creative ways. These are some of the most important ones for the issue that Dr. Crothers raised. So we're going to begin with Jaimie Philip from the Center for Community Change. We're going to work hard to keep people to 10 minutes each. Feel free to time at home, as I'm going to be timing here. And part of this is in the interest of seeing if before the hour is up, we could have some time for questions and answers. All right, so why don't we begin? Thank you.
Great. So thanks for the group accountability, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good morning. It's great to be here. Thank you, Dr. Crothers, for really grounding us again in the work to get us started. My name is Jaimie Philip, and I'm a policy analyst at the Center for Community Change. I'm based in Washington, D.C., but I'm originally from Detroit, so it's really great to be back here in the Midwest. My mom is really grateful, too. I'm going home to Michigan after this. So prior to working with CCC, I worked with the low-wage restaurant worker organization in Detroit, and one of our members, Lisa, had a criminal record, an offense that she committed 10 years prior. Lisa isn't alone. It's not uncommon in the service industry, an industry with low barriers to entry-level positions and few educational requirements, to have a criminal history. Still, even with significant experience working in fast food and family-style restaurants, Lisa found it difficult to compete with other workers in a challenging economic climate, with fewer and fewer job openings because of her criminal history. She also found it difficult to find a job with family-sustaining wages in the restaurant industry, especially without the additional training needed to work in higher-end restaurants. We have an excellent panel that will be sharing information about their work related to jobs and working with formerly incarcerated people, particularly among communities of color. And I'd like to kick us off by more broadly discussing challenges related to employment and opportunities for organizing and establishing essential programs as one set of approaches to address the economic crisis in our communities. So there are four big issues that we must address regarding economic consequences of criminalization and race. First, discrimination against job seekers because they have been incarcerated frequently discrimination against job seekers because they've been incarcerated frequently coupled with discrimination based on race. Skills and work history because people may not have the skills they need for particular jobs and recent work histories that employers frequently demand. Why? Because our society has chosen to invest in jails and prisons instead of education. Also, there are simply not enough jobs for everyone who wants a job, particularly high-quality jobs with decent wages. And also, fees, fines, and costs drive people with criminal histories deeper into poverty and back to prison. So in each area, there's work to be done that can improve the situation if we organize to build power and have the support of influential allies. And so what follows is a brief overview of some of the strategies that have been or might be used in any particular community, including communities represented by this panel. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's guidance interprets Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to apply to criminal background checks because of the disparate impact on people of color. The guidance affirms that private or public employers that have an automatic or blanket exclusions of people with criminal records from all employment opportunities violates federal civil rights laws. Instead, employers must use a case-by-case approach and take into account the age of the individual's offense, the nature and severity of the offense, whether the offense is actually job-related, and an individual assessment of rehabilitation. A recently completed 3-year study by Scott Decker and others looked at the impact of a prison record on gaining employment when people with and without criminal records applied online and in person. The applicants included African American, Latino, and white men and women. Not surprisingly, whether applying online or in person, applicants with criminal records fared worse than applicants without criminal records. This was more so the case for African American and Latino applicants compared to their white counterparts, and tended to be most prevalent in the food service sector. Job seekers can be affected by discrimination at any number of steps in the hiring process, starting with the application, along the way as an employer considers the application, and right up until the job offer is made or not made. Major U.S. cities, counties, and states have adopted fair hiring policies to remove unfair barriers to employment for qualified workers with criminal records, specifically by removing conviction history questions from job applications. This reform, commonly known as Ban the Box, continues to gain traction and has passed into law into more than 12 states and 60 cities and localities. So each time I was preparing for this presentation, I had to keep changing the number because that's how quickly this movement is gaining traction. And so by removing questions about convictions, people can be judged first by their qualifications, and if employers must ask about convictions, which they still can, they can ask later in the hiring process. And this is incredibly significant for the more than 65 million people who have an arrest or a conviction record. Ban the Box has sparked a movement that has led to organizing for further reforms in the hiring process. These additional reforms include expanding employer coverage to extend the policy to private employers, not just public employers. Also, limiting all background checks to sensitive positions and inquiring only after a conditional employment offer, referencing the EEOC standards, providing applicants copies of background reports and a statement of reasons for the denial, and allowing applicants time to correct information while keeping the position open, and also incorporating stronger enforcement by adopting specific penalties and fines, allowing the person to sue in court, providing for a community oversight mechanism, and collecting and analyzing complaint data. Other strategies to address discriminatory hiring practices include enforcing the EEOC guidelines, using state and local anti-discrimination laws to prohibit discrimination based on criminal history for additional recourse, and using occupational licensing laws to presume rehabilitation if the sentence is served or a specified period has passed without a subsequent record. So Lisa experienced discrimination because employers looked at her criminal record and constantly overlooked her qualifications. In today's challenging economic climate, she remained unemployed, and the gap between the present day and her past work history widened. She didn't have the opportunity she needed to advance in the service industry, which tends to value experience over career ladders and credentials. Employers are looking for workers with the ability to get along with coworkers, deal with the public as necessary, show up to work on time, and be ready to work. Many people already have these skills, even if they don't have any recent job history. Some people have never worked steadily in their lives and may need help in these areas, or have housing, drug and alcohol, and other issues that are also barriers to doing well. Employers evaluate applicants based on their work history and recent employment or an interview of some sort. In some situations, when through union contracts or a hiring hall, it may be a union or intermediary that screens for these things, and employers aren't directly involved in decision-making. Regardless, supporting formerly incarcerated people by building skills and developing work history is also an essential strategy to increase employment opportunities. So job training and education programs can be extremely helpful in order to address skill needs and establish a history of employment. Programming can happen both during incarceration and after release. Job readiness training helps people prepare for interviews and identify work documents that they might need. Occupational skills training paired with temporarily subsidized jobs provide people with immediate work experience, immediate pay, and builds work skills. Ideally, job counselors and employment specialists work with people individually to connect them to long-term employment, and once placed in a full-time job, people may receive follow-up services as well. So there are many challenges to gaining employment for formerly incarcerated people. But one additional challenge is that there are simply not enough jobs for everyone who wants a job, especially those jobs that pay wages to support a family. Long-term unemployment remains a significant concern. Over a third of the 9.8 million people who are unemployed, or 3.5 million people, have been looking for work for 27 weeks or longer. The Labor Department also uses an alternative unemployment rate measure, which includes people who want to work but are discouraged from looking, and people working part-time because they can't find full-time jobs. This rate is still higher than before the start of the recession. By this measure, about 19 million people are unemployed or underemployed.
30 seconds.
All right. Okay, so today we see not only insufficient job numbers, but also insufficient job quality. And more than 6 years after the start of the recession, most of the jobs that we see in the recovery are concentrated in lower wage jobs. And so there are 2 million fewer jobs in mid-wage and higher wage industries than at the start of the recession. And there are several strategies to actually increase hiring at the local level. And so you see several of them here. There are campaigns for targeted hiring agreements, also known as first source hiring, requiring employers to give preference in hiring or setting aside a portion of jobs for particular residents. Bid incentive programs, which can award projects to contractors that meet the best combination of not just price and outcomes, but also benefits to the local community, including diversity initiatives. Cities can provide supplemental tax credits, such as financial incentives. And there are several ways to be specific about those benefits to make those the most effective strategies. And the last area that I wanted to discuss before wrapping up are the fees, fines, and costs that are frequently overlooked as an economic consequence of criminal records, but that are crushing families and people in prison. And the reason, so there are many types of fees, fines, and costs, pre-conviction sentencing and jail and prison fees, phone fees, parole and probation fines, child support costs, and poverty penalties based on inability to pay and eventually drive people back to prison, a 21st century debtor's prison. And the use of credit reports by employers also makes it more difficult for people to find jobs. And there are many ways to reform these areas. But one big area I would say is that is to eliminate the actual use of poverty penalties based on inability to pay, and to avoid keeping people in prison without even a conviction because they're unable to pay a fine. So thank you for this presentation opportunity, so this isn't an exhaustive presentation of all the economic implications that describe how the intersection of criminalization and race contributes to economic inequality, but hopefully it does provide an overview of some of the major issues and potential ways forward. And our panel will provide some very rich insights into the specific aspects of these areas. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm doing pretty well so far. Now we'd like Reverend Kelly Wilkins from Washington, D.C. and IAF Group to make her presentation on public works projects and job creation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am with Covenant Baptist United Church of Christ. I serve there as their Minister of Social Justice, and our pastors are the Reverend Dr. Christine and Dennis Wiley. And let me just say, they ordained me as the Minister of Social Justice, but 90% of the people that I was ministering to and serving were returning home from prison. So I added re-entry to my title, and no one in the church said a thing. So they were all fine with Minister of Social Justice and re-entry. And so our church, and that speaks to the context of our neighborhood and our church. I won't spend a lot of time talking about that because I only have 10 minutes. And so I want to say that our church is east of the river, which we call the economic dividing line in the District of Columbia, which means that regentrification hasn't crossed the bridge yet. And so people who live east of the river experience all of the social, economic, racial disparities that you experience in an impoverished neighborhood all throughout the United States. 40% of the people that return home towards 8. 23% of the people who return home towards 7, which are both east of the river. 50% of the people that return home are homeless, in and out of shelters. 8,000 people return home. And so we are dealing with a catastrophe east of the river, an epidemic, when we talk about homelessness and unemployment, underemployment, and those who are just completely discouraged looking for work. And so by the time a person gets referred to me for reintegration services, they had already been out of work for 2 years, 3 years. They have already stopped looking for work. And some of their stories haunt you because you don't know the kinds of things that people have to go through to survive. And so a 24-year-old man said to me, he said, I have kids, I have a family, I've been looking for work for 2 years. What do they want me to do? Go back to prison? And so his voice haunted me. And so when the Industrial Areas Foundation organizer came to me and asked me what was important, and I said housing, but I really think that if we can train people, give them a career, and employ them, then the housing issue would diminish. And so really I would like to focus on housing. And so him and I began to sit down. He asked if I can bring some leaders together, and I knocked on some pastor doors and they didn't answer. So I began to sit down with leaders in the communities, volunteers, that people who were running groups for me, returning citizens, and they were all excited about how we can look for jobs in our community. And so what we began, I can't talk about how many closed doors we came across, but one thing that we said was, well, let's follow the money. And so we began to, the city puts out a report, we looked at the report, and we began to look at all of the funds that were going to developers, private developers, Targets, the Marriotts, all of this money that we were giving them, but one stood out, and it was a public. There were public funds going to DC Water, and that's a utilities company, and so we began to wonder, why are we giving them $3.5 billion? And so we began to look at the details behind that and found out that in 2005, the Environmental Protection Agency sued the District of Columbia for what we call stormwater runoff. And that is the fastest growing pollution in the country. And if you look in even other developed countries, they're having the same problem. And what happens is that with all the overdevelopment in urban cities and all of the things going on in our rural areas, what happens is when it rains and it pours down and it rains too fast for the water to absorb into the land, or the soil, or because we have overdeveloped the land, we have tar, we have concrete, that water runs off into our marine life. It runs off into the water. It pollutes our bays, it pollutes our water, our lakes. And so if you Google stormwater runoff, you will see all over this country. I Googled and found out Chicago, the canal and the river and the Lake Michigan, you could see how they were polluting one another. And so it's all this issue. And so the EPA said that the District of Columbia had to do something about it. And so the people of the District of Columbia had to fund how to get rid of this stormwater pollution. And so what happened is, since 2005, they've been taxing us, and that money was going to go towards a major infrastructure project. And as a matter of fact, by the time we found out about it, one of the projects had already taken place or was taking place. And so we began to do more research. We pulled together some engineers in the community, some environmentalists, and then we got some community folks in the room, and they began the environmentalists and the engineers got to talking, and they were talking their lingo, and I didn't know what the heck they were talking about, and when it was all over with, I said, can we get some jobs out of this? And they said, yes, we think you can. And so they said, how many jobs you need? And I said, oh, you know, about 500, 600. And this one gentleman, he was a returning citizen, he said, we need about 2,000 jobs. And I said, okay, we need 2,000 jobs. And so then we called the union people in, and we said, if we take this amount of money for a pilot project, how many jobs can we create? And the union did the numbers. And so what I'm saying is that to start something, you don't have to know what you're doing. You have to bring some people together. And so we had some important stakeholders. Environmentalists care about the environment, but people in the community cared about the jobs. But we had a self-interest that overlapped. And we thought that we can do something about this issue of jobs if we came together. And so that was the first step. We didn't know what we were doing, but we came together. So then we said, we need to do a little bit more research. We brought some people together in the community, some more our members that are part of the Washington Interfaith Network, and congregations, mosques, you know, all of that. And we began to tell them about this project. And they liked it. And we said, we need you to brief people to let them know about this and see if we can get some support. We briefed over 1,000 people, and overwhelmingly people wanted us to address the issue of jobs. And so then we start calling DC Water, right? We wanted to meet the head of DC Water, and he sort of blew us off at first, but it turned out I ran a mentor organization initiative that mentored men and women coming home from prison. And his secretary was one of my mentors for the last 3 years. And so I called her and I said, we need to meet with your boss. And we met with him. And, you know, he said all these church people, the rabbis and stuff, they're real nice, but he just kind of blew us off, you know. And he kept meeting with us to kind of appease us. But we got some numbers. You have to get the numbers. They had an 11% hiring rate for major projects for local folks. They hired more people from Missouri than they did people in the District of Columbia. They hired more people from North Carolina than they did in my ward where we serve. And so we began to hold their feet to the fire about the local hiring. And you know, first they were listening and they kind of blew us off, but we saw that they had town hall meetings. So in numbers, we showed up in town hall meetings. And Mr. Hawkins, he's a nice guy, but he controls the meeting. So you can only ask questions if you write it on an index card, you know. And so I'm sitting there thinking, like, what are we going to do? And I get a little tap on my shoulder, and then one of the organizers called me to the back of the room, the caucus, and they said, it was the leaders back there, and they said, Reverend, we need you to interrupt the meeting. I said, me? That's rude, right? Interrupt the meeting. And so I waited to the right time, and I stood up and I said, Mr. Hawkins, we want to know what you're going to do about hiring our residents. And when I stood up, everybody else stood up, right? So we had like a posse, and we had returning citizens, and we had union members, and we had all these people there with us, church folks, and so he tried to address it on the spot, and we were having a larger action. We invited him, but he didn't show up. We had 800 people on Earth Day. Oh Lord, I'm in trouble. And so we Earth Day show up, and so we kept pushing. We kept on agitating and showing up at board meetings and agitating, and it began to change. The tide began to change. They went from not even having jobs on their agenda to every committee talking about jobs. And then now, as I'm going to sum it up, and where we are now is this year we had another action, and Mr. Hawkins showed up. We had 600 people there. And we asked him, Mr. Hawkins, what are you going to do about jobs? Because where your plant sits, the neighborhood has a 47% unemployment rate. And you have the ability to train people. You have the ability to take the stormwater project and make it a career for people. And so it's not just a dead-end job that you dig a hole one time, but it's a job that leads to careers because of the way it can be changed. And so he said that no one had ever pushed him about jobs before. And he said that it was not even on their agenda. But because of us, it is now on their agenda. I have to stop.
Isn't that a great story? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay. Now, to my left is Lora MacDonald from Metro Organization for Racial and Economic Equity. Where are you from? Which town?
Kansas City.
Kansas City. Okay, thank you.
We're squared, actually.
All right, let's go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lora MacDonald from, we say more squared, where we have an exponent in our name, which means we want more, times more, and we will get more, and we will grow exponentially. We are a Gamaliel affiliate, and I just want to give a shout out to all the Gamaliel people here. I think there's 12 other disciples besides me in the house. So More Squared is in Kansas City, which is actually in Missouri and also in Kansas. So we operate in 2 states, and we work also on local issues. But I want to tell you guys why this white lady does this kind of work really quickly. So in 1994, I was sitting in a Missouri prison. And I was looking over some papers, and I was reading this social history of this person. And I saw that this person who I was about to meet with was born the same year I was born, in 1973. And I saw his parents' name, and his mother and my mother happened to have the same name, first and middle name, Patricia Ann, not uncommon, right? I spoke to the guy. He came in and we sat down and met. And the reason I was meeting with him at the age of 21 in a Missouri prison is I was an unpaid intern. And in Missouri, we have this program called shock incarceration. And we don't shock people there or anything like that. It's supposed to shock people into good behavior, right? You go to prison. So what happens is the judge will give you a lengthy sentence, like 14 years or 7 years, but he usually, sometimes she will say, but I'm gonna give you the opportunity for shock incarceration. And it's a program that you go into, and you're there for 120 days. And after 120 days, somebody tells the judge whether you should get out of prison or not. So as an unpaid intern, that was my job, deciding whether people should get out of prison or not. And the whole reason I had gone to work in this prison as an unpaid intern was because I saw myself as a criminal and had been very deviant in my own youth and angst and anger. So I thought maybe I, in my camaraderie, could do something to help these folks, right? And what I understood was I needed to help all of us. So that day I met with this man, and he went on to tell me that his mom had been a certified nurse's aide. That's the kind of work my mom typically did. I guess that's what women named Patricia Ann do. And he told me his dad did construction work when he was a kid, and that's also what my dad had done. And he told me his dad had split. He left the family for not reasons unlike the reasons my dad left our family when we were both about 12 years old. And he was from Kansas City, and I too was from the area of Kansas City. So as this man told me his own story, he was telling me my story, except that he had melanin in his skin more than I. And it became very clear to me in that moment that he was placed in my life, a man by the name of King, whose name I haven't publicly said before today, but Mr. King, because we have these social work ethics that say we're not supposed to tell people's names, but I felt the need to name this King in my life who led me to this kind of work. So Mr. King shared with me my own story and his own teenage angst and anger and the things that led him to incarceration. And they happened to be the same things that actually led and propelled me to college. And I was very clear that the only difference was that he was a man of color and I was a woman who was pink freckled and very privileged, who more than once had been told by police officers, "Go home, little girl, go home." And he was not allowed to go home, and he had not done anything that I hadn't done. Absolutely, he had not done anything wrong that I hadn't also done. So in that moment, I realized I had this responsibility that comes with privilege, and we all have privilege in different ways, right? But I understood my responsibility, not to him. He inspires this work, right, Mr. King, but the responsibility to all of us to free ourselves from this system that would allow a 21-year-old girl to decide a man's fate who shares her exact same background. So that's why I do this kind of work. And what happened in my life was eventually, I thought at that time I was probably too stupid to continue to work in a prison and do this and try to fight this internally, and quite often got called little girl when I worked in the prison by the prisoner, or by the prison staff, right? And they would say things like, "Stick around, you'll think like us." And I said, "God help me if I do, I better leave." So, so I started this work on the outside, and I realized we have far more power to create change outside of a bureaucracy than within it, right? And Gamaliel became eventually the vehicle for that. And so I would suggest to you, Gamaliel already works on issues related to mass incarceration. When we work on transit, when we work on job creation, we're set out to create 1 million jobs, right? And so that means jobs for people who happen to have criminal offenses in their backgrounds. When we're working on things like voter engagement and telling people that the myth that's been manufactured for you, that you cannot vote because you have a felony. In my state, that's actually not true, but people believe that, right? So we're doing already working on mass incarceration, and in our local communities, and that's why there are 13 of us here today. We are working really well on local issues. So I want to tell you just a couple of those. We in Kansas City, we've seen some success through a number of different things. And let's be really clear, like, we can't talk about this without using a racialized context. Certainly when we're speaking to a group of entirely Caucasian lawmakers who hold the power, we put before them Caucasian people who have been snagged in the very wide net that was cast. We heard the quote, "When they came for me, there was no one left." So there certainly are Caucasian people who are, so we find them and they become leaders in this movement as well, who've been caught up in systems. But we need to really keep it real. When we talk about jobs, it is harder for an African American man in this nation without a criminal record to find a job than a white man, sometimes with a record of a sex offense or pedophilia. And I've seen it throughout my social work career. So we need to be really honest about it is difficult for people of color to find jobs in this nation because of the stigma and because of the fact that we've been given this sensory information day in and day out that shows black man bad, white man successful, day in and day out, right? And our biology tells us, we're wired to believe that somehow everything we take in, our sensory information, is there to protect us, right? And so when we see the nightly news, we become victims if we want to, if we choose to. We become victims of what we see on the nightly news, right? So first what we need to do is continue to raise consciousness and not talk to people as though there are people who are victims and there are people who are offenders, because I've been both. I've been victimized, and I've certainly offended many of people. Hopefully now I do it for righteousness and justice. So I like to talk about people as people. I don't like terminology like ex-offender, offender, returning a citizen is adequate, but I like to say people, and we're all survivors, right? If we're getting this right, we're all still here, so we're survivors. So that's the framework that we use. And some of the successes we've had, we've passed Ban the Box in 2 cities in Kansas City, and a number of Gamaliel affiliates have done the same. We passed 2 cities in the Kansas City metro, I meant to say. We right now have a bill that's pending in Missouri, you're banned for life from food stamps. If you've ever had a drug offense, a bill that I've been, and many of your states did it also, right? There's 9 of us still left who are doing that. That was part of the Clinton administration's war on drugs. And now states have to create legislation to opt out. We have removed in Kansas, they were branding people with, in red letters, the words registered offender on their driver's license. So what does that mean when you go, and I'm not just talking about people with sex offenses, but also people with drug offenses and numbers of violent crimes. We got that removed.
Amen.
Thank you. And Oklahoma has done that too, so you can continue to work on that. Driver's licenses, there are licensure issues, right? So now they've become very sophisticated. You can't be a barber legally in Missouri if you have a felony conviction, right? You can't work as a certified nurse's aide. There's many other licensure, insurance companies will drop employers from liability insurance. So we need to like chip away at all of these little things at a local level, and organizations like all of ours and like Gamaliel will link up at the national level, and I hope continue to shift this dialogue and make us all survivors.
Thank you. All right, now we're welcome Brandon Sturdivant from Oakland Community Organizations as our last panelist, and it looks like we'll have plenty of time for some questions and answers. Thank you.
Good morning. All right, I'm up here. I'm awake. Y'all got to be awake too, right? Right? Good morning. So I'm Brandon Sturdivant Senior. I have a junior. But I got to sleep in last night. So I'm from Oakland, California. I come into this work because I have no choice. I am the only male in my family who has not been to jail, who has not been to prison, who has never been on parole, who's never been on probation, and the only one right now that's gainfully employed. So I'm an organizer, so I don't make much, right? But I make enough to pay my bills, and I can't say the same for any male in my family. So this work is personal for me, and as I was finishing up school, I had no other choice but to come into this work. So I see Reverend Michael Ray looking at me. I'm actually, I'm an organizer with PICO. You probably heard him speak yesterday, but just a quick credential. We're a faith-based organizing group, interfaith, and we represent over 1 million families nationwide, focus on a number of issues, and it is based on the principle that folks closest to the pain know the solution. Right? Folks closest to the pain know the solution. That is one of our key principles in our work. I'm also part of, within PICO, the Lifelines to Healing campaign, which is, again, an interfaith focus on stopping the epidemic of gun violence and mass incarceration in our community. And we're going to do so, we're 4 or 5 years into this, but we're going to do so by making sure that those issues are on the tongues and in the minds of legislators all over this nation. I'm talking about from your local ward member. I did some time. I actually lived in D.C. for a while, so it is like doing time in D.C. Slipped, but Marion Bear, and we're gonna do that by motivating and training 25,000 leaders nationwide who at any moment are going to be able to mobilize and make sure that those issues get done. Again, from the local all the way to the national. Can you give me, how much time do I have?
You've got about 7.5.
All right, when I get to 5, throw it up at me, please. So this work is about story, right? It's always about story. It's always about that person who goes from powerlessness to being powerful. So I want to tell you all about Barbara Lafitte Oluwale, who is a surrogate mother to me. She's on staff with OCO now, Oakland Community Organizations, who I work for. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's not as important as Barbara. Barbara lost a son. His name was Toots. She lost a son, I believe, in 2004. He witnessed a murder. One of his friends was murdered in the West Oakland, the community that Barbara and I are both from. And, you know, they always say somebody needs to stand up in our community, right? Somebody needs to stand up and tell the truth. Who did it? There needs to be justice. Well, Toots decided to do that. He decided to testify. And as such, he went into witness protection. I believe he was turning 23. It was his early 20s. I don't know the exact age. And so it was his birthday. So he came home. And when he came home, he went to, you know, a local food store and was killed in the parking lot. He was shot 3 times, and he lay on the ground. To be honest, you know, begging for his life. And the guy was walking away and heard him and kind of came back and shot him and made sure he was dead. Stood over his body and killed him. So that is one of the reasons why I continue this work, and that is one of the reasons why we are now focusing on mass incarceration and economic dignity. So how do we get there? Because of the murder of our young black and brown men in Oakland, our pastors grew tired of doing these funerals over and over and over again. So we ushered in, this strategy called ceasefire. Do folks know ceasefire around the room? It's a data-driven strategy, right? Making sure we focus on those who are most likely to be victims and perpetrators of violence, the shooters. And because of that effort, we were able to get in deep relationship with folks who were shooters. And Barbara, in particular, was able to get into a relationship with these folks. Now, I don't know if you're catching it, but this is a victim, right? This is the mother of somebody who was killed by a shooter in Oakland, starting to engage with shooters. Now, she didn't start there, right? She started with arrest pretty much everybody, get them off the street. But via ceasefire, she took that step forward and said, I'm going to engage with them because I don't want to see it happen to anyone else, right? Now, we didn't just jump into mass incarceration. What we decided to do is follow that principle, which is people closer to the pain should be part of the solution. They know the solution. They should lead the work to get to that solution. So we talked to some of these brothers, and Barbara led the effort to start having some meetings with them. And you know what they said? We shoot because of 2 things. One, we do not have jobs, right? I don't want to be out here doing this. A lot of this has to do with, you know, me supporting myself and my family. And the fact of what got them to where they were was, part of it was mass incarceration. The fact that they had been to jail and or prison, right? They got worse instead of better. They were part of a punitive system instead of a rehabilitative system, right? So that sparked something in our leaders, Barbara primarily, who started leading this effort to say, if this is what we want, if this is what, they want, let's work with these brothers to make sure that they get what they need. So we ushered in a focus on mass incarceration, which we're doing now, but we're here talking about jobs. So we also started doing some real work on creating job opportunities for our brothers. So I'd like to say that this work is something that our leaders are really proud of, because it didn't start with them saying we need jobs. We want to work on jobs. It started from a brother who was a shooter in Oakland saying that, if you want us to stop shooting, give us opportunity. So I see that whiteboard. I'm tempted to go over there and start mapping out some of our strategy, but I won't do it. Okay, look, he's
Questions people may want you to.
okay. So the work that we've done has been three-pronged. So we understand that there needs to be a focus on safety net solutions, right? We need housing for our brothers, right? We need things like medical attention. We need food for our brothers. But we've decided to look at it through our three prongs, which is number one, making sure we have resources for job training. A lot of our brothers, to get the gainful employment, they have a number of assets, but we want to help them train up so they can get the jobs that'll make sure that their families and them are successful and having sustainable wages. Number two, we're focusing on policies like the Oakland Army base in Oakland, which is going to bring in about 3,000 to 5,000 jobs. We've got 50% local hire, 25% disadvantaged workers, and within that population, folks who are formerly incarcerated are prioritized. And we're making sure we have a job center where folks can go and get trained. And lastly, we're talking about tangible jobs, right? So we're moving towards healthcare. This field is expanding. As more folks are coming in, we need to hire more people, especially in California. So we are holding our county's feet to the fire and saying that you have 10,000 jobs. You're probably going to add about 1,000 more. Some of those jobs should be set aside for folks who are our loved ones who are home and or coming home. And, you know, one of the things I want to end with is, again, bringing it back to Barbara. Barbara is now one of the leads on holding our government accountable for making sure our folks get resources for job training. Sending a text because she just set up like 3 more meetings with our council members to make sure that the money that the city has with the Workforce Investment Act goes down and trickles down to the folks who need it on the ground. And that, that puts a little stress on me because now we got to plan for 3 research meetings in the next 2 weeks, along with everything else. But I'm proud to say that the work is really about the people and the people leading, and we've been, we're not successful because it's not over, but we're moving towards that process by following the pain of our people. Thank you.
Well, it's been a great panel. I hope the second panel can live up to this one. So thank you, Brandon. Thank each of you and Jaimie. So we do have some time for questions, comments, responses, and why don't we just see if anybody does have something they want to ask or share.
I've been in social services for about 15 years, and there's a lot of programs for youth, but I don't see programs that are really holistic with the family, with where the family has been and where they are now. And so in organizing, I'm interested to know where are we at on that. Also, jobless people is an issue, but without an education, it's going to be very difficult for you to find a job. So what are we doing? And that's one of the things that interests me about Gamilio. Their efforts in eliminating discrimination within the school system to provide proper education to our kids so that they can be successful and graduate. And so what initiatives are there to go into the community and educate our families, our parents, our kids coming out of the prison system so that they can have the credentials to be able to obtain a job. Nowadays, we're about service-oriented. You got NPO.net, Indeed.com, Monster. There's jobs everywhere. But if you don't hold the credentials for you to be able to get the job, you're not going to get it, especially if you don't have a high school diploma. So where is the movement on that?
Okay, so one thing I realized I should have done. Could you just say your name and where you're from?
My name is Israel Vargas, and I'm from Roosevelt University.
Okay, thank you very much. So we had your question about working with the whole family and also education, beginning in schools in terms of addressing some of this issue. Which the second panel is going to address, so stick around for that. Okay, who would like to reflect on this question about contact with whole families. Is that something you feel you can address?
So I think we've realized that it's important to target the family and not just the individual, right? Because folks are a part of families, right? Folks have networks, right? And in a public health model, which we follow pretty closely, protective factors are gainful employment, but it's also the surroundings, starting with the family, moving out towards institutions, the larger community, and society. So if we're thinking like that, in our best selves, we are focusing on overarching policies that are not just for formerly incarcerated folks. So the 50% local hire in West Oakland doesn't just hit folks who are our loved ones who are returning. It also hits their fathers, their mothers, right? The little brother who's growing up in the community and seeing all this joblessness. And that is for all our policies, right? Our frame is that we need to help folks who are reentering and the entire community, because we work in low income communities of color. The other thing about the education piece, I'm talking about the Lifelines to Healing campaign, but as the network PICO and also Oakland community organizations, we prioritize efforts to that link or end the cycle of mass incarceration, before it even begins, I should say. So when we look at our work right now, we have a bond measure that'll fund our schools in downtrodden communities in Oakland, Deep East Oakland, Central Oakland, and West Oakland, where I'm from. It's based on linked learning, and this will make sure that our kids get 21st century education, and they'll be more likely to stick around in school because what they're learning will directly impact their lives as they move forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes. Can you say who you are?
Yeah, Michael Ray Matthews.
Oh, hi. Good to see you.
Live in San Jose, California. This might be for Reverend Wilkins, but I suppose anyone could respond to this. I'm wondering about how your work is having an impact on congregations and faith communities. Because I'm thinking about the ways in which, at least from my own experience in the community that I grew up in, we sort of assumed a level playing field when it came to these issues around our boys' engagement with the criminal justice system. And so we, for a long time, sort of agreed that they deserved whatever they got, and that the troubles they were having all began with them making bad decisions. And so, a lot of the work that we've been doing in the past decade has been sort of trying to break up that dominant narrative. But I'm wondering, to what extent are you seeing that happen in congregations that you're working with? Are pastors and folks in the pews beginning to open up and understand that there's a much bigger systemic issue at work here that really is unjust?
I think there's a mixture of both. I think that there are some congregations or some leadership that they have been consistently silent on the issue. But I think in the political environment in the District of Columbia, there is much talk about over-policing of our communities. We just passed a decriminalization, they just voted to pass a decriminalization of marijuana bill, and it was mainly based on the arrest rates of African American males. 90-something%, it was about maybe 98% of those arrested were African American males. And so I think that these kinds of numbers, no one can deny that there is this racial undertone, and it's ruining the lives of our African American males, and our communities are exacerbated because of records and in and out of prison, and that people, they don't come back the same, right? And they come back worse because the prisons offer nothing for them in terms of growth in life. And so I think there's conversation, but there's still too much silence. And I've gone to congregations before and asked if their congregation would be interested in mentoring a person returning home. And the pastor would say, they're in a ward where people return home in great numbers, and the pastor would say, oh, my congregation's not ready. And I'm thinking like, well, I think you have people on your congregation that are returning citizens or got families who are, who have members incarcerated. I think it's the leadership that's not ready, right? So you get that, but also you get people who get that issue. So I think it's a combination, but it's still way too many people silent, or who have not figured out how, as Dr. Braxton said yesterday, give faith a job. And so, to know it, but actually do something about it.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello. My name is Frank from Connected to Manager.
You could come to one of these microphones.
I just talk loud. Can y'all hear me over there?
No, just use your mic, bro.
I don't have a mic.
Yeah, but come to one up here.
Go ahead, Frank.
Go, Frank.
Where am I going? Come on over.
Any one of them. Here you go. Thank you, Frank.
All right, y'all welcome. Actually, I have sort of like two questions, sort of for you, but for anybody else. Coming from the system, I understand that growing up, a lot of times you can give a person training, but it's sort of like that same mentality. Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. If you take a person that don't know how to deal with finances and money and give them $1 million, most people win the lottery, what happens? They wind up being broke. So if you give a person some training, job training when he gets out, that may be, it's good, it's one thing. However, if you don't get, I believe that if you don't get to the root of it, which the root of it is dealing with some of the distortions that individuals have as a young boy. When you go into the system, a lot of times you have a lot of misconception what I spoke on before, what manhood is about. So my question is there anything that you're dealing with PICO and in California? Because it's something that I want to try to focus on in Madison as well, as far as mentorship, trying to actually take the individuals before they get out of prison and actually try to give them a foundation of stability, responsibility, community, a sense of community. Because a lot of individuals, they don't have a sense of community. They can walk by and see you get robbed and say, so what? Sense of community is that if I see you get robbed, I'm either going to call the police or try to help you out. So my question is there anything that y'all trying to deal with in mentorship? And then my other question is there any concept or any thought with anyone as far as trying to actually make a partnership with this job training with organizations within the community? So you have big organizations. In Wisconsin, we have like John Deere, we have other large corporations that are worldwide. So is there any type of plan or thought or action to deal with corporations and actually bring them in to say, okay, train these individuals, either partner up with while you're in prison, when you get out, that way they get jobs and go forward and actually have a better sense of self and confidence moving forward, as opposed to, well, we're going to wait till you get out. And a lot of individuals, they don't want to wait till they get out because they're frustrated and they don't know. So
Good.
those are my questions.
So, on the aspect of mentorship and things of that nature, self-development, we're not a service provision organization. We do policy. We bring resources, and those resources do go to folks who do those types of training, that type of development. I organize, but I know there are folks out there who know what they're doing with the population and can really help folks change their lives. What I will say is, for our mass incarceration work, which is a different wing of this, we are totally focused on that, on making sure that people have what they need through risk assessments before they come home, through partnering with case managers before they come home, folks who provide services, meeting them inside and helping them transition outside. One of the things we're helping to do is start a transition center. I want to be brief because other folks probably want to talk on this.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and then the last thing is the the problem right now with folks being inside is that corporations already are inside. Folks like Google, folks like AT&T, and they actually, people build their furniture and things like that, and when they get out, that box is there that says, you know, do you have a felony?
Yeah.
So that's some of the organizing that needs to happen as well.
Laura?
So I've worked on both programmatic and policy solutions, and I would suggest to all of us that we need to work on both. Absolutely. Now that I'm working on the policy, and what's really clear is there is a really promising programmatic solution for not just for people who have been incarcerated, but others, called Transitional Jobs. If you're familiar with the model, basically it pays people an hourly wage. It could be the day you walk out of jail or prison, pays you an hourly wage, offers total wraparound services for yourself and your family, and you get even benefits while on the transitional job. So it's something to build resume. It's also something for that man who's 30 years old, who's never had a job in his life, and street code and corporate code are quite different, actually. And so if your supervisor tells you what to do in front of your colleagues, that's his job. But on the streets, he's fronting you, right? And so you've got to translate that and create that transition from street life to. So what we're working on in Kansas City as a policy solution is let's leverage those sewage system jobs that we're creating, those stormwater jobs that we're creating. Let's leverage some of that work as transitional jobs. So we're looking at leveraging some millions of dollars toward transitional jobs with total wraparound services that pay people to do. And as it turns out, it saves your cities, your municipalities a lot of money, because you are not paying prevailing wage or paying a training wage until the person can get on a permanent job. So there's a policy/programmatic solution. Programs lack money, lack capacity, so we need to be the policy people that leverage the money and the capacity, I think.
Great, thank you. Kelly?
I think the district is a little unique in that in terms of preparing people before they re-enter becomes very difficult because we don't have a prison. And so people are all over the country. Illinois, Texas, all over the country, and so we can't really do we can only do reintegration services when people return home, and so that leaves us always sort of behind. But there are plenty of organizations that provide the mentoring before, to prevent folks from making critical mistakes that might lead them into incarceration. But we have member organizations that actually do the mentoring on the ground, and then in terms of training with the stormwater project, we are asking either the district DC Water, or we're asking that our unions provide the training and the skills for people to be prepared to work in the workforce. So there is it's all a part of the plan, but in terms of wraparound services, that's something that our member organizations will have to figure out and provide.